Well, I wasn't born on Treasure Island, but my parents were living on Treasure Island when I was born. I was born at St. Anthony's Hospital, March of 1945. We were here for a little bit. My dad had just gotten back from the war, and he decided he wanted to go to medical school. He'd gotten his degree in chemical engineering and decided he wanted to be a doctor, so we moved up to Detroit, Michigan for a few years, and then back down here. I think it was probably about 1953, and he went to work at Mound Park Hospital. Went into an office with my grandfather, Melvin Page, who had been here since the 20s.
Wow.
And he practiced there and was on call at Mound Park Hospital and he did house calls for $5. $5 would get
Now,
you a house
Mound
call.
Park is now the Bayfront Center, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was Mound Park back then.
And was that the only hospital in the area?
I think so. Well, no, it couldn't have been because I was born in St. Anthony's, so
Okay,
St.
so-
Anthony's was here.
Cool.
But I don't know. You know, that was I was just a little boy. I wouldn't be aware of that kind of stuff. I was aware of Mound Park because my dad worked there,
Sure.
and I was told that I was born at St. Anthony's, so I knew about that.
Yeah.
But we lived out here at 10490 Gulf Boulevard,
Uh-huh.
which is basically across from the VIP Lounge now.
Uh-huh.
And it was, it was Gulfront property, and it was a little two-bedroom cottage up on stilts. It had a wood floor with linoleum on it in the kitchen. The rest was just wood, and the wind would blow up through it. And, it had precast concrete step that was just moved in, so it was 3 steps from your back door, which was the kitchen. The kitchens in those cottages were always in back, and 3 steps down this stair, this concrete stair, and you were on the ground. And now Gulf Boulevard was on the east side of the house, so it was Gulf Boulevard ran behind our back door. But I can remember digging on the beach when I was a little boy, and I found asphalt. And I found out that Gulf Boulevard had originally run on the west side of the house, on the front side of the house, and they had moved it back. I don't know why. We had plenty of beach there then, lots of sea oats. We had lots of Australian pines,
Wow.
and it was very quiet. Australian pines are very quiet trees. When you walk into an Australian pine grove, the sound level immediately drops. It's a good sound muffling tree. It makes everything around it quiet.
Yeah.
But
Now, was that a single-family home that you lived in?
oh yeah, it was a tiny place. It was probably about 800 square feet.
And when did you build the Page Terrace? And was that the property that you built the Page Terrace on, or was that just a family home?
That was my grandfather's property.
I see.
And after we moved out of the cottage, the name of the cottage was Mañana, which means tomorrow. That was his little cottage. And we lived in the cottage for a while, and then we moved to Paradise Island. And sometime after that, my grandfather leased it out to an outfit that built the Georgian Terrace.
Oh, Georgian Terrace, okay, yeah.
Wasn't the old city hall right next to that? The cottage.
I don't remember.
There was the old city hall was down in that neck of the woods, and the little miniature golf course later.
There was a miniature golf course next door to us. Mr. Neely owned it, and I would make money when I was a little boy. I would go over there and I would sweep his golf course for him, and he'd pay me 15 cents a hole, that was a lot of bread for a kid to have back
Yeah.
then.
Now, what year would that have been?
That was probably 53,
Uh-huh.
54.
Yeah.
It was, and I remember that we had one policeman for the island. His name was Gene Marshall. I think he was the only one. And his uniform was Bermuda shorts and a short sleeve shirt and sandals. And he drove his own car. And he had a gun. He had a pistol that he kept at home in his dresser just in case he needed it. And he was also the default dog catcher. Because our dog was always getting loose. We had this big, stupid dog, and it was a boxer, and it would run down the beach. And the motels, we had a few motels out here then, and we had a lot of coconut trees. And what they would do is they'd cut the top off the coconut tree, and the coconut tree would be slanted, and then they would stack inner tubes on the tree. They'd use it to store their inner tubes, and then the tourists would take these things out in the Gulf. Well, our dog would run down the beach and bite all those inner tubes and flatten them. And so Gene Marshall would have to pick up the dog and bring it back to our house. And, you know, we'd be in trouble, and my mother would make him some would serve him some apple pie and coffee, and then there was no more trouble. And we made a few friends because of that dog. Now, what was the woman's name that owned the Suncoast Motel?
Oh, yeah.
It's still there. The hotel's still there. I can't remember her name.
I'm drawing a-
Connie.
Connie?
Connie.
Yeah.
I
And
don't
is it
re-
called the Suncoast still?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
called the
that's right,
Suncoast back
Suncoast,
then.
yeah.
Connie Gill?
Connie Gill,
Yeah,
right.
that was Twinkies.
And surprisingly enough, we did make pretty good friends with her, even though our dog was destroying her property. I remember when I was a little boy, I came out the back door of the cottage, and there was an ambulance across the street. And so I went over to see what it was, and there was an ice house there. It was one of these old-fashioned ice houses. I don't know if it manufactured the ice there, but you put a quarter in, and you get out a big block of ice. And I think a lot of people probably still had ice boxes back then. And then, you know, you take some guy had, and you would put a quarter in the machine, and then a big block of ice would come out this chute, and you could carry it away. Well, some guy had tried to crawl into the chute, and I don't know whether he wanted to steal some ice or get some money. I don't know what the deal was, but he got stuck in there and he died. And I remember they had to pull him out, and that was the first time I saw a dead person. I think I was probably about 6 years old. And I remember that to this day. And I went to Gulf Beaches School, elementary school, and we had no air conditioning. We had pretty high, we must have had pretty high ceilings, because I remember the windows were very high, and you had to open the windows with a hook because you couldn't reach them. And they were well ventilated, and I can't ever remember being uncomfortable from the heat during the day, but boy, at night it was so uncomfortable. I can remember I would climb in bed at night, and the sheets would be hotter than my skin. And I just couldn't sleep, And the air was so still, and it was very humid because we were right on the Gulf. And then we moved to Paradise Island. And the new house had terrazzo floors. Didn't have air conditioning, but it had terrazzo floors. And at night I could get down on that terrazzo floor and go to sleep, and it was like heaven. It would just cool me right off. Now I do remember one time there was a motel, the Windjammer.
Oh, yeah.
It was right next to our house, that little cottage I was talking about. And I remember Richard Nixon came and stayed there once. So he must have been vice president at the time, so that would have been during the Eisenhower administration, one of them. And then a storm blew up, and a waterspout came out of the Gulf and took the roof off the Windjammer Hotel. Nixon wasn't there then,
Yeah.
but the Windjammer lost its roof that time. But I think the Windjammer is still there, isn't it?
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was our 15 minutes of fame there when Nixon moved in for a night. I heard talking about Sunset Beach. I remember Sunset Beach back then. And Sunset Beach back in the 40s and 50s is basically where the fishermen lived. This was before the hippies and before all the dope moved in and everything. It was the end of the beach that the fishermen lived on. And people that didn't have a lot of money would all live down there. And I do remember the Penguin Restaurant. We'd go down there and eat on Friday and Saturday night, and the prime rib was delicious. And I remember the other fellow was talking about Wenstrom Standard Station. Now, when I got to be a teenager, there wasn't very much to do on Treasure Island, so the teenage boys would all hang out down at the gas stations. And there were two basic gas stations that they hung out at, the Gulf Station and the Standard Station. They were right across from each other. And we were kind of in competition with each other. We had the Gulf Station's gang and the Standard Station's gang, and we would work on cars. And the owners of the places, Merv, I think, owned the Gulf Station.
One near where the bank is now, the dentist's office, that was McConnell and Spangler.
Oh, yeah. Well, we didn't go down there.
That's a different one.
Yeah, that's a different one. McConnell was a cop back then. We didn't hang out at his gas station. I don't think he would have liked it. But these two guys that had these stations, that was kind of like our home away from home. And they showed us how to work on cars and let us work on our own cars there, as long as we didn't get too much in the way. And that was a big deal. And I saw my first Japanese motorcycle at that place. And we looked at that thing, and it was just a stupid looking thing. And I remember we looked at that thing and thought, what a cheap, and I said, nobody's going to buy this crap. And then, of course, over a few years later, they put every motorcycle manufacturer out of business except for Harley
Was a
Davidson.
Honda probably or something.
No, I don't know what it was. It was everything printed on it was in Japanese.
Oh.
Couldn't tell what it said.
Now, those gas stations, is that where now the McDonald's is?
McDonald's?
Yeah, and then the Raleigh gas station now was on the other corner.
Right, that was the Standard Station.
That was,
And McDonald's was the Gulf Station.
Okay.
And next door to that was a hardware store.
With the trimmers. Wayne Trimmer, I think his name was.
I didn't know the guy's name, but I used to go in there to get stuff. And he had the first piece of electronics besides a radio that I saw. He had an electric eye that would ring a bell when you walked in the door. And
They lived up above, I think, on the second floor, and I think he built the one right here in the corner, that's now the Oasis.
Oh.
could be,
Yeah.
could be.
Boy, modern electronics comes to Treasure Island.
Modern electronics comes to Treasure Island. Now, Madeira, we did have some electronics on the boats
Oh.
on Treasure Island. I think it was weren't there two boats called the Atlantis One and the Atlanta One? Yeah, I remember another fish story, actually. And for a while I doubted my own memory on this one, but when I lived at the cottage, so I was still pretty young, it came on TV or the radio or something that what are those huge sharks? They're vegetarians. Is it the basking shark? What's the other name for that shark, Richard? Anyway, it's one of those big vegetarian sharks that gets 50 feet long.
Wow.
Apparently, they were out there fishing, and somebody looked down and saw this shadow of this huge fish under the boat.
Whale shark.
Whale shark, there you go. And I think it was probably around 1957.
Wow.
And they didn't know what to do, but they didn't want to let a fish like this get away. So they took an anchor and dropped it in its mouth.
No.
Yeah, now this is a strange story, and like I say, I started to doubt my own memory for a while.
Yeah.
I would tell the story and people would look at me like, yeah, right. And this fish took off when they dropped the anchor in its mouth and started towing the boat around. Well, it towed the boat for a very long time, and when the sun started to go down, the shark was still towing them around and wasn't getting tired, and they had to cut the anchor loose to get away. And I told this story for years, and people just looked at me like I was nuts. And then about 10 years ago or so, on St. Pete Beach, there was a diner down there. I think it was called the Starlight.
Yeah.
It wasn't around when we were kids.
Right.
But I used to go in there with my father about 10 or 15 years ago, and they had some articles from newspapers from way back when, and there was an article about that happening. And so I'm convinced that it happened now.
Indicated.
I am vindicated to myself.
Yeah, the Starlight was the old diner, wasn't it? About halfway down on St. Pete Beach.
Yeah, I didn't go
Down-
down to St. Pete Beach too much when I
Yeah.
was a kid. That was like a foreign country to me.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think there probably was a diner there because it was an old-fashioned looking diner,
right.
except it was really done up
Yeah.
well on the inside, you know, all modern hardware and tables and stuff like
Right
that.
next to where the old Gulf Beach Bank was, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Right next to that, that Holiday Inn Hotel where the
Right.
top spins
Oh,
around.
further down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, I know the one you're thinking about.
Yeah,
You know, somebody bought that.
yeah.
It's sitting next to a warehouse down near where I live now. I don't know what they're gonna do with it. Somebody buys up all the junk they can find. There was a trampoline center on Treasure Island when I was a teenager, and I used to teach with Phil Nemeth, whose mother ran the dress shop across the street, and Al Generette, who just recently died here. His dad had Generette's Market, which would be, we called it the Treasure Island Shopping Center back then. What is it called now?
The plaza? Let me just write down here, it's on,
The clock tower area?
Yeah, but it's on the north side of the clock tower, which differentiates it from the one on the south side.
I think it was maybe still called the plaza.
Yeah,
There was a
But that-
toy store in there at one time.
yeah. And Generette's Market was there.
Huh.
And of course, on the other end of the island, there was another grocery store that that didn't have even any screens in it. And it had these awnings that were made out of wood that they would prop up with sticks. And you would go there and buy things. And I don't believe they had a cash register. They kept their money in a cigar box.
Towards John's Pass.
No, toward right next door to Blind Pass.
Line,
On the Treasure Island side? Or-
Treasure Island side, where Cosmecos used to be.
Yeah.
yeah.
And somebody robbed that place one day, and I guess Gene Marshall was chasing him down the beach, and this guy was throwing money out the window to try to get rid of the cash that he took. And we had another little tiny grocery store at the Seahorse. You know, the Seahorse cottages
No?
on Treasure Island, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was a little tiny grocery store in there that had room for about, 3 or 4 people to be in it all at the same time.
Huh.
There was a counties market up near John's Pass.
Really?
Counties? Remember that?
Yeah, no,
I don't remember that one. When I was a kid, when I was growing up on Paradise Island, they were still dredging parts of it in. Am I still?
no, go on, yeah.
Okay. They're still dredging parts of it in, and so parts of it were mangrove and mud, clay, thick clay. And we would get these big refrigerator boxes. I don't know where we got so many of them, but we could throw these boxes on top of this clay and step on it, and then throw another box and walk out on that, pick the one up behind us, and we could get out to the mangroves that way. And but I could go down to Bruder's drugstore and go into the air conditioning and sit there at the soda fountain and order a small Coke for a nickel and have this I was 7 years old, had this absolutely beautiful 16-year-old girl pour this Coca-Cola for me. And I remember I would just sit in there in the air conditioning and sip that Coke real slowly and look at her, and I was
And how much was the Coke back then?
a nickel.
A nickel.
That was a small Coke. A large Coke was a dime. Growing up on Paradise Island, the part of time I spent on Paradise Island, the kids just kind of ran around in gangs out there. We were digging forts and stuff like this. And when we got hungry, our parents we were wild Indians. My mother would throw me out in the morning and tell me not to come back until it was time to eat. And so we would just run around and be crazy until we got hungry. And then we could just go and knock on somebody's door if we were hungry, and they would take us in and feed us. It was really nice, and there was the dogs ran loose out there. They were not fenced in. You didn't have to pick up behind them. And any strangers that came on the island would have this big pack of dogs following them wherever they went, barking at them. If they didn't live on the island, that's the way the dogs were. I'm trying to remember the name of the place I like to go the best. Remember the twins, Sherry and Candy?
Sherry and Candy. Rings a bell, but I'm not clear on that. There were another pair
The
of twins.
Doyles.
Doyles?
Yeah.
Okay.
We used to like to go eat at the Doyles. Food was really great there.
All right.
I remember the Cavarettas, the Flying Cavarettas lived down the street from us.
Huh.
Well, they were a circus act.
Oh,
And they had this 8-year-old girl that was in the family, Terry Cavaretta, that was part of the Flying Cavarettas. I mean, we would be down at the beach, you know, we were young teenage boys wanting to be strong and look good for the girls, and we're down there on the high bar working out and doing all this stuff. And Terry Cavaretta, this 8-year-old girl, would come down there and do something like 25 or 30 chin-ups. And none of us could do that. She was just amazing. I was a paper boy out there too.
no.
Made a killing on the St. Pete Independent, which is no longer being published.
Now, did you do the whole island when you did that, or did you have an area?
I did the whole island.
The whole island.
I did part of Treasure Island. I did part of Isle of Capri and Isle of Palms. And then I had a rack route and a throw route on Madeira Beach. So I was kind of a little hustler back then.
So you got up early in the morning?
No, it was the evening.
Oh, the
Independent.
evening, that's right, the Independent.
But I didn't add all those paper routes until I got a motorcycle when I was 14. And then I really started to tear it up. It was good. I was 14. I was probably making $100 a week. That was a lot of money back then. 100. You could raise a
That's
family.
huge.
You could raise a family on $100 a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't raise a family on $100 a day. Cub Scouts. I was in Cub Scouts with Richard.
About
Yeah.
54,
Was that it?
I think so.
Yeah, we met at the Church by the Sea on Madeira Beach. And
It's interesting. How was Gulf Boulevard back then? I mean, it was a 2-lane road, right?
yeah, it was 2-lane.
Yeah. And any thing that you can remember on the island that was noteworthy? Fires, hurricanes, you know?
Hurricanes. I remember hurricanes. I don't know how old I was. I remember I had one of those Brownie box cameras
Yeah.
that you would look down at the top. It had 2 lenses in the front. One was a finder and the other one was the... And you would look down from the top and take pictures. So I had one of those. And a hurricane was coming. And it didn't look like it was going to hit us. But I got up one morning and I walked down those 3 stairs I was telling you about at the cottage. It was barely light. And I remember when I stepped down on the bottom step, I stepped into water. And I remember looking out and seeing that my dad had a 55 Chevy, so it was probably around 1955, maybe 54. And seeing the water up, 8-10 inches on the tires of the 55. And wondering, and the hurricane wasn't, the wind hadn't even really started to blow. And I was wondering, well, how are we going to get off this island if the car is submerged? Well, somehow we did get off the island. We went to my grandfather's place.
On the
That's-
mainland?
Yeah, it was on Pinellas Point. We always went there for hurricanes. That was just standard operating procedure. And when we came back after the storm, I wish I had those pictures too, because I took that old Brownie box camera and walked down Sunset Beach. And all the houses were still there, but the ones that weren't up on stilts, what happened was the water would wash all the sand out from under the foundation. The house would break in half, and half would wash out into the Gulf, and the other half would stay there. And I remember walking down, taking pictures of all this stuff and thinking, you know, I would look in there and it was like looking at a dollhouse. All the furniture was there, the picture was on the wall. You expected to see, you know, the father sitting in his chair smoking his pipe and reading the newspaper, and the living room rug would be laying out of the house onto the sand like a tongue sticking out of a mouth. And that was the kind of damage that the storm did down there. Now, it didn't bother our place. Our place was a really rickety little place, but it was up on stilts. So that kind of damage didn't hit us. Now, my dad, evidently, you know, he was young and still a little bit crazy, and he decided he was going to take a kayak out in the storm.
Oh.
And he made it into shore, but without the kayak. And 3 or 4 days later, the kayak washed up on the beach, and it was filled with sand. It was canvas strung over, you know, a wood frame, and it was filled with sand, and it was just fat like a sausage filled with sand, and it was, you know, we couldn't lift it.
Yeah.
But he went out in some hurricane. I don't know if it was the same one.
Wow.
Yeah, after the hurricane, Sunset Beach, all the boulevard would always be covered with sand. You clear that out.
Yeah, well, at the VIP lounge for a long time, they had a shark mounted over the bar. It was a 6-foot shark that they had caught underneath the traffic light where Gulf Boulevard and the Treasure Island Causeway intersected. They caught a 6-foot shark there during the storm.
Underneath it.
Yeah. I don't know what happened to that shark. It was there for a long time.
Well, nobody can figure out why the VIP lounge is Mexican.
I don't know why.
That's kind of funny. But it's great Mexican food.
It's not bad.
Yeah,
It's not
no, it's
bad.
not bad at all. So, now do you remember the days that Treasure Island City was that, let's see, Sunset Beach, was it still its own municipality back in the early 50s, wasn't it?
I don't know. I was not politically aware
Yeah.
back then. I don't know if it was part of Treasure Island or if it was its own entity then.
So to have the one cop, we were formed up as a city of Treasure Island, I guess. Or who paid for him?
Well, I've been told that Sunset Beach used to be physically separate from Treasure Island too, and somebody put a bunch of junk cars in the past between Treasure Island and Sunset Beach and filled it up with sand. Now, I don't know if that's true or not.
Physically separate.
Physically separated by water.
There was Sunset Beach, Sunshine Beach, Treasure Island. and,
Really?
Which one?
Coney.
Coney Island, yeah. So there were actually 4 communities that merged eventually.
Wow.
Were you born here, Richard?
No, Washington DC. When we came down here, 46, 47.
Yeah, I remember your dad and Bobby were some of the first people I met after my dad got out of medical school, and we moved back down here to the cottage again, because Bobby had somehow become wounded with a hunting knife, and your dad brought him down to my place for my dad to stitch him up.
Mhm.
And then I met Butch Ellsworth shortly after that. He stepped on a stingray, and his dad brought him down there for whatever you do for a stingray. Probably Adolph's meat tenderizer. I don't know.
And you're beginning to get the whole Cub Scout pack together there now.
Yeah, that's right. Butch.
Which was in there.
So
Yeah.
Butch was here back in the young days. He
was there a long time.
wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was there starting in probably the early 50s.
Wow.
Just a little kid.
Yeah.
But I went to school with him. He was a year younger than I was, I think.
Cool.
Little tiny guy back then.
Yeah. How about the Rices? Did you know the Rice family or the?
Evidently I
the
did, but
past?
but I don't remember much about them.
The old Kingfish restaurant had been probably here by then.
Well, we ate at the Kingfish all the time. My grandmother used to like to go there.
Yeah.
But my grandfather owned that land that the cottage was on, and where the Publix market is now, he owned that, and the land across the street from the Publix, which is a parkour course now, some kind of a,
The park?
yeah, the park.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
He owned that.
Wow. So he also owned the land where Allied Insurance is the big glass building?
I don't know if he owned that part of it or not, but he owned the part where the park was. I don't know what the deal was on that. I think that he had some, what I was told was that he had put it into some kind of a trust to avoid taxes. And the guy that designed the trust created no way for him to get it back out again. And he ended up giving it to a dental school, I think.
Wow.
And then somehow the dental school passed it on to somebody else, and it eventually ended up, I don't know how it eventually ended up. With the city owns that now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
interesting.
the Publix land he sold, and he leased the cottage land.
Wow.
That was later on, my uncle was able to break the lease and somehow, because it was a 99-year lease. He was able to, and they were getting it for something like $10,000 a year, 100 feet on the beach, or 125 feet of beachfront property for 10 grand a year. And my uncle somehow was able to break the lease and take possession of it and distribute funds to everybody in the family.
Wow. Now, the old Blind Pass area on Sunset Beach, as kids, you must have played down at the old point.
No, I didn't play at the point. That was
Too far south?
yeah, that was too far away. But
Yeah.
there was a kid that lived down there, Leonard Nuzzo,
Yes.
who lived most of the way to Sunset Beach. His older brother, what's his
Joe?
Joe Nuzzo,
Yeah, surf shop.
owns a surf shop down there. Well, Leonard was, I think, a year or two younger, and I used to play with Leonard when I was a little boy.
Okay.
And Leonard later died. And then I met Joe during my surfing phase. And Joe and I used to go surfing.
Wow.
But he was almost all the way down to Sunset Beach, and I'd walk probably half the way down there, and Leonard would walk half the way up the other direction, and we'd meet and you know, go swimming and stuff.
Yeah. So the Nuzzo family lived down in that area of Sunset Beach, or?
I think they did.
I never knew that. I knew Joe pretty well,
Yeah.
but I didn't know.
I think they may have lived there because either that or next door to where the surf shop is, because I would walk down to meet Leonard. He had to be walking from somewhere. He was just a little kid too.
Huh.
I think Joe's your age.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm not sure how old, but yeah.
Yeah, I think he's your age and I'm a year younger. So Leonard was probably either my age or a year younger than I was. But there was no surf down there.
Yeah.
I don't know why he ever started a surf shop there,
Yeah.
other than he loved surfing. But we used to drive over to the East Coast and
Yeah.
sleep under the piers there and go surfing in the morning.
Was that Jetty Park and Daytona area, or?
Well, we went to Daytona. I don't remember exactly the area. There was one place we went there, I think it was in Melbourne, it was called the Shark Pit.
Oh, yeah.
We'd surf there.
Yeah.
Never got very good.
Yeah. That's fine. Hi, Tom Mumford here with the Tales of Treasure Island. We're hoping you enjoy these episodes of the early days on Treasure Island. They're great, aren't they? Along with Donna White, Bob Dowling, Barb Driscoll, and Carol Coward, we're going to bring you more episodes of the Tales of Treasure Island.